Hey there everybody, welcome to Auto Bears, and yes, usually I'm stood outside the car introducing it. However, the weather is definitely against me today, but let me introduce you to my full review of the new Honda CR-V. Now, it's always a good day when a manufacturer brings out a new model, and nowadays especially if it's an SUV, they are still all the rage. However, I do feel that the CR-V, having lived with it for a week, has got a bit of an identity crisis. Now, yes, it does sit between the HR-V and the CR-V, but it's not in the middle. In fact, it's much closer to the CR-V, especially when it comes to price. So that means that both cars are fighting in the same battle group and going against the same rivals. And that's a bit of an awkward position for the CR-V in some areas because it is actually quite worse off compared to rivals. So as a result, it has got a limited kind of appeal to it, especially if you're looking at the mainstream cars in this segment. But having lived with the CR-V this week, I am going to answer a couple of questions. Number one, what is the car like? And number two, who's going to go for it? Now, when I first drove the CR-V last year at its UK launch, I did say the styling was not too bad. It wasn't going to win any beauty contests, and it wouldn't really compete with the likes of the Hyundai Tucson or Kia Sportage. Now, having lived with the CR-V this week, I have changed my opinion somewhat a little bit. Now, at the front you can definitely see hints of Honda Civic still, especially with the headlight design, but I definitely get the impression that if the Honda Civic and the Ford Kuga spent a night together, that front end would be the love child as a result. And also at the rear with that tail light design, again, it's quite un-Honda-ish in the way it's been laid out. I do again get hints of Ford and even Toyota in its design, but you guys let me know in the comments section below what you think. And then we got the side profile of the CR-V, where it has this kind of SUV estate look to it. So you could be thinking it could be like an estate version of the Honda Civic, but unfortunately the Civic actually has a larger boot than the CR-V, and that was a genuine surprise. So what you end up having is this kind of SUV estate looking car with hints of Honda and definitely hints of other car as well. But I don't think it's a ugly car per se, but I don't think as well it stands out, especially compared to rivals in this segment. But again, let me know what you think in the comments section below. And on that note, I think it's time we stop talking about the outside and, well, talk about the inside. So, sat inside the CR-V, you are greeted by a very comfortable, really nicely designed interior that is actually jam-packed full of kit, and it is a very comfortable place to be. Now, because this is a small to mid-size SUV, getting in and out of the CR-V is very easy because of the raised seating position. So if you do suffer from any kind of mobility issues, then this is one car to look at, but I will mention that we don't have any grab handles for the driver, and surprisingly, we haven't got them from the front passenger as well. So that's a bit of a surprise. But once you're sat in the driver's seat, you find that the seats themselves are very comfortable. They do hold a big bear like me in place, and there is a good level of adjustment, which is electrical. However, I actually don't have any lumbar adjustment, so that is a bit of a surprise and quite disappointing as well. But then I have got the steering, where I have got both rake and reach adjustments, so getting the perfect driving position is easy. And then when it comes to the interior design, this is something we're starting to see in other Hondas, like the Civic and the new CR-V, where we have kind of a traditional modern layout. We do have physical buttons as well, but it is kind of dominated by grille here that goes along the middle of the dash. It is quite unique, and it does make the Honda stand out from other cars in this segment. So it is a nice kind of design in here, but again, it's not very flashy, but it is very functional. And then when it comes to interior quality, again, this is actually a bit of a highlight. We've got leatherette and soft plastics on the dash and on the doors as well. Plenty of leatherette here on the door panel and also on the sides of the door handles. And also on the center console, we got plenty of leatherette as well. You actually have to go quite far down in order to come across some hard, scratchy plastics. And even then, they've got this weird kind of wavy effect to them, which is a trend that goes on throughout the car. But yeah, when it comes to the kind of interior quality, it is actually pretty good. And when it comes to the hard scratchy plastics, they are of a good quality as well. Cubby spaces in the ZR-V are actually not too bad. We've got some decent sized door pockets. We can get a medium sized bottle of drink in there, but they're not lined with any fabric, so loose items will rattle around a bit. I will mention that some rivals do have larger door pockets, but that's just a minor little quibble there. Then we have got a little space next to the buttons here on the right hand side. Not really sure what its function is because you can't put the key in there because it will fall out. It's not rubber lined either, so any loose change will just make some noise in there. Now on the center console up front, we have got a wireless charging pad from the sport trim level and upwards. It is rubberized, so your phone won't go anywhere, and we've also got a 12-volt socket. Then just behind there, we've got a couple of cup holders. They are of a decent size and shape with a couple of plastic grippers, but it's not rubber lined, it is hard scratchy plastic. The only issue is if you do put any tall bottles in there, it is going to block the dual zone climate control, so just be aware of that. Then just behind there, we've got this kind of floating spine part to the center console, where underneath we have got a little tray area. It is rubber lined as well. You can put a couple of phones down there because we have got USB-A and USB-C charging inputs, and that's where you would connect your phone up to the wireless Apple CarPlay, or tethered if you want to go that way, and also Android Auto, which is only tethered on the ZR-V. And then we have got the center armrest, which is actually of a very decent size and shape. It is very deep as well, and it is rubber lined. I do really like that. And then finally we have got the glove box, which is of an okay size. It's not lined with any fabric. The book pack does take up a bit of the space in there, not as much as a Hyundai Group car though. And yeah, it's not lined with any fabric, so loose items will rattle around a bit, but I would like to see that be just a little bit larger, or at least lockable. And then finally, we've got a little spot there for your sunglasses. So yeah, when it comes to cubby spaces here in the ZR-V, they're actually not too bad. A little bit quirky in some areas, especially underneath this kind of floating center console. But yeah, in a couple of other areas, some rivals do have more space. But earlier, the interior of the ZR-V has a very familiar feel to it, especially if you've driven the Honda Civic and new CR-V. So with this interior design, it does have a nice family feel to it, but also it means we've got plenty of buttons. So we have got a couple of physical buttons here with the infotainment system along with a rotary knob. Then we've got the dual zone climate control, which is really easy to use when on the move, and I do love how the little rotary knobs are damped. It does have a nice quality feel to them. And then on the center console here up front, we have got the gear select buttons, and then just behind there we've got your drive mode select, we've got hill descent control, we then have your electric handbrake and auto hold. Then on the steering wheel on the left hand side, we have got your media and communication controls with a little rubberized rocker switch, so you can go through the left hand side of the driver data display. And then on the right hand side, we've got our radar guided cruise control controls with another little rubberized rocker wheel, which controls the right hand side of the digital driver's display. So that makes it really easy to operate when on the move. We have got some flappy paddles on the back of the steering wheel, and here's the big surprise. Yeah, they're actually metal. That is a genuine surprise to find in a Honda. So it does give a really nice air of quality to the interior. And then we have a couple of buttons on the right hand side that do your traction control and also your boot opening for the rear. So yeah, when it comes to the layout and the buttons here in the ZR-V, they're really nicely positioned and they're really easy to use, especially when on the move. And then finally, we've got the infotainment system and the digital driver display. Both of them are no-nonsense displays, and I really do like the way that they are presented. Now with the infotainment system, it is a 9-inch touchscreen with a couple of physical buttons on the edge, and it's much more responsive and much quicker to react than Honda systems of old, which I really do appreciate, and so will you. As I mentioned, you've got Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. With Apple CarPlay, it is also wireless, and yeah, it's just much quicker than what we've seen before. There's a very no-nonsense feel to it. Basically, all the displays are really nicely laid out. And yeah, it's actually a really nice system to use. If I had a couple of niggles with the system itself, is firstly, the screen itself is a little bit too small. At 9 inches, when compared to its rivals, yeah, it is going to come up a little bit short. And this is 2024. We all want things to be bigger. And unfortunately, 9 inches, when compared to its rivals, just simply isn't enough. I mean, Hyundai Group have 12.3 inches on their infotainment screens. Secondly, I'd love to see the screen just turn towards myself, so that way the cockpit feels a bit more driver-centric. It really does stand out that it is flat and flush in the middle of the dashboard. But there are a couple of little perks as well. Firstly, we have got your little support and ridge to rest your fingers on whilst you go through the various menus. And then secondly, there's this coating that's on the screen itself, and for some reason it's just not prone to smudges and fingerprints compared to its rivals. So I really do like that. However, that is missing on the ENY1 electric SUV from Honda. But even though that was a brilliant infotainment system, for some reason they just didn't put that kind of covering on there. But never mind. And then finally we got the digital dashboard display, which is a really lovely display, and again it's got a no-nonsense feel to it. On the left hand side you've got your power gauge and your regen meter, and on the right hand side you've got your speedometer, and then in the middle of them you do have your little rocker switches to go through various menus in the middle of those little kind of analog displays. And then in the middle of the display itself you will have your radar guided cruise control and all the little functionality there if you need it. So yeah, it's a very no-nonsense display. It does present you with a lot of information, but you don't get bombarded with it, which is really nice. But it is really clearly presented, so I really do like that system. But yeah, it just doesn't have the customization and flair of, say, a Volkswagen Group system or a virtual cockpit from Audi. But when it comes to the interior of the ZR-V, especially having living with it for the last week, it's a very comfortable place to be. There's a good amount of adjustment, and it is actually just a very, yeah, it's a nice place to be if you're going on a medium or even a long journey. There's a good amount of functionality, and I love the fact that there are plenty of buttons still in this cabin. And yeah, on that note, I think it's time that we leave the front seats of the ZR-V and see what it's like for rear passengers. Sat in the back of the ZR-V, this is actually one of the car's plus points because it is very spacious and comfortable back here. Now that driver's seat is set to my driving position. I'm 5'7" tall and 5'7" wide, and as you can see I've got a huge amount of knee room, and headroom isn't too bad either. You could possibly get a couple of 6-footers sat in the back of the ZR-V, and you can also get your feet underneath the driver's seat, so that is handy. Now if you had a couple of adults that weren't as wide as myself, you could at a push get 3 sat in the back here, but it's definitely more comfortable for 2 adults, but you could get 3 kids back here because there's no transmission hump to navigate over, which is a real positive. Now speaking of kids, we have got ISOFIX supports on the outer seats, and there's just a bit of a gap in the fabric to make actually affixing a child's seat pretty easy. I will say there isn't any ISOFIX supports on the front passenger seat, so that's a little bit of a disappointment. But when it comes to cubby spaces, I'm going to say it's okay. So they have got some door pockets where you could get a medium-sized bottle of drink in there, but again not lined with any fabric. We have got your aeroplane style pockets on the backs of the front seats, and we have got your centre armrest with a couple of extra cup holders, which is very handy. However, we got nothing behind the centre armrest where you could perhaps store your phone, because we have got a couple of air vents and also a couple of USB-C charging inputs, so that's actually quite handy. And then we got the windows, which are really nice size and shape. They are tinted on this sport trim level, but they don't open all the way down. They only go about 80% or so. However, I can still rest my arm on top of the window, and what I do like is that there isn't a drop in quality back here. This is still soft touch plastic, and we have got the leatherette here on the door panel, so that is actually a real positive. So yeah, being sat here in the back of the ZR-V is, yeah, a bit of a positive. It is nice and spacious, has a couple of features, but yeah, could do with some more cubby features, I would say, in cubby spaces. And on that note, I think it's time we talk about the boot, but yeah, not necessarily go out there just yet. So opening the boot of the ZR-V presents you with 380 litres of space, which quite frankly in this segment is pretty poor. In fact, it only beats one other car, and that's the Subaru Crosstrek. But when you got the boot open, you are greeted with a nice wide square load area. There's no boot lip to navigate over. However, the boot is a little bit higher than you would expect on a Honda car. So that's just something to be aware of if you're loading any large bulky items in the boot area, like a mobility scooter, or if you've got a dog jumping in and out. Now, it's not devoid of features either, though. We have got some sturdy tethering hooks, we got a 12-volt socket, and a couple of shopping hooks that can hold 3 kilos each, and I do like the way they tuck in to the boot area. On the right hand side, we've got a little bit of netted space, which is surprisingly deep, and also we've got a bit of underfloor storage, which is very handy. And what I like as well is that the floor is separated into 2 sections, so you can lift the first section up and create a bit of a divide, but that's also handy because you can put the parcel shelf underneath the boot floor. So that's definitely a handy feature, especially, like I said, if you're loading any large heavy objects into the back of the ZR-V. And when you get the rear seats down, you have an almost completely flat load area. There is a little bit of an incline there, but that is actually a really nice space to use. But we haven't got any magic seats in the ZR-V, it's just regular bench seat here in the back. But yeah, when it comes to the boot capacity of the ZR-V, it is very poor when compared to rivals, and I would definitely look at the Honda CR-V because that has a much larger boot capacity. But like I said, you've got to look at the ZR-V as being a bit of a niche vehicle, especially when compared to its rivals. So on that note, I think it's time we get driving in the ZR-V and see what it's like on the road. So once you start driving the ZR-V, just like the Honda Civic, it's a really positive kind of feel once you get going. It's very comfortable and easy to drive, and you also get this kind of feeling from the ZR-V that it wants to be driven, and you get that in the kind of handling of this car. Now, because this is a small to medium size SUV, when it comes to visibility, it is for the most part actually really good. Now, because I'm sat high up, I've got a wonderful view of the road ahead. Now, Honda have got this new design trait where they create like a flat horizon at the bottom of the windscreen, which makes it really lovely to see out of. I don't know what it is that they've done, but as you can see here, it's just very flat. So as a result, I've got loads of visibility up front. The A-pillars are not too thick, and I've not found myself looking around them at any junctions. The wing mirrors are of a lovely size and shape. They have been moved back onto the doors, just like on the Civic as well, but they do give off a little bit of wind noise. And then if I look over my shoulder, I do find that the C-pillar is a little bit thick, but I have got blind spot monitoring, so that is a positive. And then rear visibility is actually really good. It's a nice large screen at the back, and I've got no obstructions from the rear headrests. So yeah, all-round visibility in the ZR-V is very good. There is this weird kind of Honda philosophy with forward visibility, which I really do like. And as I said, when you get driving the ZR-V, there's just something about it where, I don't know, it kind of just lets you know it wants to be driven, just like the Civic hatchback. Now, there are 3 trim levels to choose from in the ZR-V range. You've got the entry-level Elegance, the mid-level Sport, which is what I've got here, and the top of the range Advance. Now, what I would say is if you want to keep the car under £40,000, go for the Elegance. And I don't think you'll be disappointed because you get all the standard equipment that you would want and need. It is actually a very keenly spec'd car. However, if you don't mind going over that £40,000 barrier, then I would say look at the Advance, because actually going from the Elegance to the Advance, it's not a massive hike in price compared to other cars out there, because there's only one engine, there's only one hybrid system. It's basically the difference in trim levels and then optional extras you want to add to the car, and even then it's pretty much aesthetic. Paint colour, interior lighting, some sporty bits to add to the exterior. That's about it. You get everything that you would want and need on the car. Now, I would say the Sport is a bit of a sweet spot because, again, you get all the standard equipment that you would want and need, and yeah, I've been really impressed by it. I've been driving and living with the ZR-V for a week, and at no point have I kind of gone, oh, I really wish I had this, I really wish I had that. Everything has just worked really well, and yeah, I've had everything that I've wanted. So yeah, that's the best thing I would say. If you want to keep it under 40 grand, go for the Elegance. If you don't care about price, go for the Advance. Now, when it comes to powering the ZR-V, it is just like the Honda Civic and new CR-V. So you've got one engine to choose from, which is a 2-litre 4-cylinder naturally aspirated petrol engine, but it's mated to a hybrid system with a battery and 2 electric motors. And in terms of performance, you've got 181 brake horsepower and 315 newton meters of torque, which means 0 to 62 is taken care of in around 7.9 seconds, which isn't too bad for this type of car. And the unique thing about this hybrid setup is that we don't have a gearbox. It's all controlled via an ECU. But it actually acts like there is a gearbox in this car, because when you put your foot down, yes, it does kind of sound like a CVT to begin with, because you hear that engine drone, but then all of a sudden it's like it's going up gears, so it starts dropping revs. It's actually a very unique system and kind of sits in the middle of what Toyota have and what Nissan have with their hybrid systems, so it is quite unique. Now, when it comes to economy, because obviously that's going to be a big factor for going for a hybrid, Honda say I should get on a combined cycle around 48.7 miles per gallon. And I do believe them, because on my regular daily drive to work, which does involve a couple of A roads, a couple of B roads and some town driving, I can easily get over 50 mpg. I'm really impressed by that. However, I can drive the ZR-V a little more briskly, and I'm still getting around 44 mpg, and I again think that's very impressive. And I haven't got the car in like economy mode, it's usually in normal, or on a couple of occasions in sport. But I would say if you want to get those figures over 50, yeah, drive it around in economy, and even then it doesn't exactly take away a huge amount of power. The responsiveness is still there. But like I said, I really like how the system works and how kind of characterful it is as well. So I've got no one behind me. I'm just going to slow down a little bit. And then I'm just going to put my foot down. There's the engine. Sounds like a CVT. And then we get a drop. And then we get another drop. Unfortunately, the road noise got a little bit louder there, so you couldn't hear the engine. But that is a really unique system. And here's the key thing. It works really well, and just gives you that kind of unique driving experience, like you're driving a normal petrol car with a gearbox, but there just doesn't happen to be one there. So yeah, when it comes to the engine, it's really lovely and simple. There's one available, and it's a good one. So, as I mentioned earlier, we've got the flappy paddles on the back of the steering wheel. Now, these are not to change gear, because there's no gearbox, don't forget. So these are actually for the Regen system with the braking, and it's a little bit of a disappointment because, firstly, we've got 4 levels of Regen, but at no point do you get kind of full one-pedal driving with the ZR-V. It's not as strong as some of its rivals, particularly the likes of the Nissan Qashqai with its E-pedal. And the other thing that's a bit annoying as well is that I can put the Regen onto its strongest setting, take my foot off. Unfortunately, it's already gone. So I have to do it again. You have to take your foot off the accelerator pedal in order to engage the Regen braking. And the problem is as well, is it goes after a few seconds. If you start accelerating, it disappears. And I find that a bit disappointing because other aspects to the car remembers. Your radar guided cruise control, if you leave it on, is always on standby. The auto hold is always on. The drive mode, because I've got it in economy mode now, is always on. But that Regen system just doesn't stay on the strongest setting. And I would like it to be stronger, please. So Honda, if you can work on that for the facelifted version, of the ZR-V, and I'll also include the Civic and CR-V as well, I think we would very much all appreciate it. But the reason it's probably not as strong as its rivals out there is because the battery is not that big. I think it is like a tiny smidge over 1 kilowatt hour. So it really kind of, yeah, doesn't take too long to charge up if you are using the Regen braking or going downhill. But the thing is, when you got it in full electric mode, it very quickly goes through that battery. So yeah, it is a bit of a double-edged sword. Now, when it comes to the ride and refinement in the ZR-V, I'm going to say it's pretty good. Now, one thing to definitely mention is that this car feels like it's set up to be more of a sporty-ish driver's car than a big, comfortable family cruiser. And that definitely bodes well for the handling. So what you find is at low speed, you do find that the ride is a little bit fidgety. You do feel some of those bumps and imperfections coming into the cabin, but they're not uncomfortable. These seats do a very good job of taking a lot of the vibration out before it gets to your body. So what you find is, yeah, at low speed, it is just a little bit firmer than other cars in this segment. But as you kind of increase speed, you find that the ZR-V does settle down and the ride quality does improve. And then when it comes to the refinement side, again, it is pretty good. Now, the main intrusion into the cabin is road noise. That's about it. There is a little bit of wind noise from the wing mirrors, but even then, the road noise is actually kind of very well isolated away from the cabin compared to other cars out there. And then you only really hear the engine when you're starting the car up, or if you do, put your foot down. And if I take my foot off, that's very quickly quietened down. In fact, it went straight into EV mode, so it was kind of reading what I was doing in the conditions. So yeah, when it comes to the ride and refinement in the ZR-V, this would actually be a very decent long-range cruiser, but just be aware it is on the firm side, especially when compared to a number of its rivals out there. So what about the ZR-V's handling? Well, I've put it into sport mode and let's see what's what. So the first thing is that the steering wheel feels really nice in my hands. It's a perfect size and shape. And as I mentioned earlier, there's something about the ZR-V just wanting to be kind of controlled and handled. And as a result, what you find is that there's a bit of weight in the steering, so you do feel connected to the front wheels. However, because this is a small SUV, there is a little bit of lean and roll in the corners, even though I'm in sport mode, and yeah, it doesn't feel as composed as a Honda Civic. That car is just an absolute joy, even the family friendly version. And that's kind of the trade-off with the ZR-V is, yes, it wants to be chucked about and kind of driven, but it's not rewarding you with that kind of firm suspension and feedback that you would get from something like the Civic, which is a little bit disappointing, but I can understand what Honda are trying to do with the ZR-V. And like I said, there's a nice amount of weight in the steering. I know what the front wheels are doing, but at the same time, it makes parking the ZR-V actually really easy, because I've got the parking sensors and reversing camera as well. Because even though it is a family SUV, it's definitely on the smaller side. But yeah, the ZR-V's handling is a highlight, but it could be just a little bit better if the suspension just kind of kept it level in the corners. But it does put a little bit of a smile on your face because of that connection you have with it. It is like a Civic on stilts. So with my time in the ZR-V, what have been some of the highlights and some of the little niggles I need to let you guys know about? Well, highlights has definitely been the frugality of the ZR-V. When it was delivered to me, it actually had a full tank and was showing around 495 miles of range. And I actually think That's very impressive for this type of car. Hondas usually have very small fuel tanks, and this one is kind of no exception. It is a 57 litre fuel tank, so it's a little bit bigger than other Hondas we've seen in the past. And what Honda have claimed in other kind of readouts and that is that you can get around 620 miles range out of the ZR-V, and that's going to be a combination of the hybrid system and the petrol engine doing their bit. So that is actually very impressive. Also, what's very impressive is the Honda Sense safety system, which is linked to the radar guided cruise control. It does take an awful lot of the workload away from you, but being the latest generation of Honda sensing, it does mean that if you stray 1 mile an hour over the speed limit, you get a faint bong in the background to let you know you've done so. So yes, that is a little bit vexing and annoying, but it's not as loud as what you get in a Hyundai group car. So that is a bit of a blessing there. Also, something I love on Honda cars, it's such a cutesy little thing, is the little car on display when the radar guided cruise control is on. Because when you brake, it brakes. When you indicate, it indicates. And it even lets you know when you've got the lights on. I think it's just a cute little thing and something I'd love to see on other cars. I just love, I don't know, it's just a tiny little aesthetic, but it makes a difference. And then, I mean, in terms of another niggle, because this is a small SUV, the doors actually don't cover the underside of the car. So on a wet, horrible day like today, when you get out, you are going to get your jeans dirty, rubbing them against the bottom of the door lip. So that's just a little bit disappointing there. And then, really, I think that's it. I mean, there are a lot of good qualities to the Honda ZR-V. Lots of cute little features, but not too many negative ones. I've kind of mentioned the big ones earlier on. So I think on that note, it's time we head to the conclusion. So what are my thoughts on the Honda ZR-V? Well, having lived with it now for a week, it is quite a niche car, and that's kind of a weird thing to say for a family SUV, because this is only a few £1,000s cheaper than a Honda CR-V, and that's a much larger car, and that car can really compete with other cars in this segment. When it comes to things like boot capacity, the ZR-V very much falls short, but it does actually do well in other areas in the way it drives, in rear passenger space, standard levels of kit. But I feel that this is going to get overlooked for the CR-V, for this kind of SUV segment. But where I see this car perhaps being very popular is for those that want a Honda Civic, but perhaps have mobility issues. They really want that kind of Honda dependability. They want the good drive and the automatic and everything of the car and the hybridization, but they don't want to sit low down in the car. They want something that has a little bit of a higher seat position and also more performance than the HR-V. And that's where this car would actually do very well. However, because of that smallish boot, yeah, you are going to need to visit the dealership if you are going to put a wheelchair, a mobility scooter or something like that into the boot area of the car. So that's just something to be aware of there. But in terms of private buyers, the issue I've got is price. Because this car is a smidge under 40 grand starting, it's going to get overlooked when looking at its rivals, and people are, like I said, going to go straight to the CR-V. So Honda, you need to look at your pricing on your vehicles, because they're getting a little bit too expensive and you're going to price yourself out of these segments. If this started at about 34, 35,000, it'd be in a much, much better position. But because it starts at just touching 40, I feel it might get overlooked, which is a shame because I have got a sweet spot for the ZR-V. I do like how it drives. I do like the comfort features and the kit you get on the car. But if it was me personally, I probably wouldn't have a ZR-V. I'd have a Civic, because I got the same hybridization system, same levels of kit, I got a bigger boot, and the handling's better. So for me personally, I would look at the Civic. However, if you want a Civic, but perhaps you have mobility issues, this could be the car to go for. But like I said, if you're looking at this as a private buy, I might say just spend a little bit more money and go straight for the CR-V, because you'll have a much bigger car there. That's also going to be a bit more comfier as well. So there you go. The ZR-V, I think, is a very good car, but the price is too high, the boot space is too low, and I'm afraid it's going to get perhaps overlooked when compared to the likes of the CR-V. So everyone, I hope you've enjoyed my review of the new Honda ZR-V Hybrid. I have enjoyed my time with this car. Like I said, I have got a soft spot for it, but it is quite difficult to recommend against some of its rivals, particularly from Honda. Now, of course, don't forget to like this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell notifications icon to let you know when I, Dave the Auto Bear, bring out a new video. If you've got any questions about the ZR-V and my time with it, please put them down in the comments section below. And don't forget to follow on social media. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on X, so please follow on there for additional content. But yeah, like I said, I have enjoyed the ZR-V. I'm just worried it's going to get overlooked, but I still have a bit of a soft spot for it. But in the meantime, guys, have yourselves a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next video. So take care there, and thank you very much for being patient with me, because the weather has been so awful that I haven't been able to film in my traditional way.